The billionaire's son noticed a girl eating nothing at lunch. What he uncovered next shattered his entire world. Ethan Marshall moved through the school cafeteria with the confident ease of someone who belonged everywhere. Students parted for him without consciously realizing it, the way people make room for someone who carries quiet authority. His white shirt was crisp, his blue jacket fitted neatly across his shoulders, his trousers perfectly matched in tone. Most students wore the same uniform, but on him it seemed like it had been made specifically for him. His hair, a warm brown, fell naturally into place in a way that suggested expensive haircuts and a life without rushed mornings. He selected his lunch mechanically: chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, a bottle of juice, and carried his tray toward his usual table near the windows. His friends called out to him, waving him over, but he didn't join them. Not because he didn't like them, but because something had caught his attention again. At the far end of the cafeteria, tucked into a corner where no one ever sat unless they wanted to disappear, was the small blonde girl he had noticed before. She sat with her back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap, a posture that looked practiced rather than natural. She wore a white shirt and a red tie like everyone else, but her tie was slightly creased, her sleeves slightly faded, as though washed too many times in too little detergent. Her tray was empty. Completely empty. No milk carton. No apple. Not even a napkin. She didn't look angry or embarrassed. She simply existed there, quiet and still, as if she were trying to use as little space and energy as possible. She kept her eyes lowered, never raising them when students walked past. And yet she wasn't invisible. Not to him. The absence of food in front of her stood out more loudly than any noise in the room. The first day he had seen her, he thought perhaps she had already eaten. The second day, he thought maybe she had forgotten her lunch money. The third day, he understood it was neither. He glanced at the other tables. No one was looking at her. No one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to care. Hunger, especially in a wealthy school, was something people pretended did not exist. The cafeteria smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. It felt almost cruel to sit in that warmth without being able to touch any of it. He sat down at his usual place but did not begin eating. He found himself watching her hands. They were small, pale, and she kept pressing her thumbs together like she was trying to keep them from shaking. She waited there as if waiting was normal. As if hunger was simply another rule she was expected to follow. His friends were laughing behind him, talking about weekend plans and new sneakers and the things children with worry-free lives talk about. Ethan didn't hear any of it. He felt something unfamiliar, something tight in his chest, something unsettled. He had seen charity events, food drives, speeches about community support. His father donated to causes every year, smiling for cameras as he handed oversized checks to smiling organizations. But none of those images felt real. This did. This was hunger that had no speeches or cameras. He stood, tray in hand, and walked toward her table. His footsteps were quiet, but she still flinched slightly as he approached, as though she had been taught that being noticed usually meant something bad was about to happen. He sat down across from her without asking, placing his tray gently on the table. The girl did not look up at first. He could see her pulse fluttering at her neck. Up close, she looked even smaller than he had thought. He cleared his throat, but kept his voice soft. "I've seen you here before," he said. She nodded, eyes still lowered. He looked at her empty tray, then at his full one. He didn't want to embarrass her, didn't want to ask the wrong question. But silence felt worse. "If you want, you can have some of mine," he said, pushing the tray a little closer. Her eyes lifted at last, and he was struck by how blue they were, and how tired. There was no entitlement in them, no expectation of kindness. Only caution. "I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" She hesitated, and for a moment it seemed like she might say nothing at all. Then, quietly, as if admitting a secret that cost her something to speak, she replied, "I don't have lunch money. Not anymore." There was nothing dramatic in her tone. No self-pity. Just truth. Ethan felt the tightness in his chest deepen. It was only the beginning. But he already knew, he could not ignore her. Ethan sat there for a few seconds, unsure how to respond. The girl's words were simple, but they carried too much weight for someone her age. He pushed his tray a little closer to her, but she shook her head quickly, almost fearfully, and folded her hands tighter in her lap. It was not pride stopping her. It was something heavier, something learned. He realized he hadn't even asked her name properly, not really. "What should I call you?" he asked, keeping his tone gentle and steady. She hesitated, then answered, "Emily. Emily Carter." Her voice was small, but there was clarity in it, as if she had learned to speak softly so her words wouldn't crack. Ethan repeated her name quietly, not to memorize it, but to acknowledge her existence. He noticed the stiff way she held her shoulders, like she was trying to make herself smaller, as though taking up space was something she wasn't sure she was allowed to do. He wondered how often she had been told, directly or indirectly, that she was in the way. "Emily," Ethan said slowly, "you should eat. I have more than enough." She looked at him then, really looked. Her expression wasn't angry or suspicious. It was confused. Like the idea of someone offering something without expecting anything in return was unfamiliar. She lowered her gaze again and took a small breath. "My mom said we have to wait," she murmured. "Wait for what?" Emily swallowed, and for a moment, Ethan thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her eyes fixed on her empty tray. "Until things get better." Those words didn't sound like hope. They sounded like waiting in the dark for a door that didn't exist. Ethan thought of his own house, a massive place with high ceilings and glass walls and a fridge that always overflowed. He never thought twice about asking for more food, or new shoes, or anything. It had simply never occurred to him that hunger could happen here, in this school, where everything seemed perfectly arranged and polished. He glanced around. Other students laughed, talked, lived without noticing that at the far end of the room was a girl who had nothing to eat. Not one person had looked in her direction. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. Emily gave a tiny shrug, the kind children use when they don't want to admit something painful. "A while." He noticed she didn't say days. Or weeks. She said it like a season of life. "Does the school know?" he asked. Her reaction was immediate. Her shoulders pulled in, her breath hitched. "They can't know," she whispered, panic flickering in her eyes. "If they know, they'll call someone. And then they'll take me away. They'll say Mom can't take care of me." The way she said it told him this was not imagination. She had heard those words before. Maybe from a letter. Maybe from a neighbor. Maybe from the world itself. Ethan didn't speak right away. He didn't want to say the wrong thing and break the fragile trust forming between them. "No one is taking you away," he said, not as a comforting line, but as a promise he willed to be true. "I won't let that happen." Emily looked up at him, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief, as if no one had ever said those words to her before. "You can't promise that," she whispered. "I can try," he said. She didn't argue. She just looked at him like she wanted, desperately, to believe him. Ethan knew he couldn't solve her problems in that moment. But he also knew he couldn't walk away from the table and pretend he hadn't seen. So he tore a piece of his bread and placed it gently onto her tray. Not offering the whole tray. Not overwhelming her. Just one piece. Small. Safe. Something she could accept without feeling like she was taking too much. She stared at it, hands trembling just slightly, then lifted it to her mouth and took the tiniest bite. It was the smallest act. But it changed everything. Ethan felt something settle in him, quiet but strong. He didn't know how, or what it would require, or how far he would have to go. But he had made a decision. Emily Carter would not eat alone again. Ethan could not shake the image of Emily sitting alone with that empty tray. The rest of the school day slid past him like blurred color and noise, teachers' voices sounding distant and unreal. He answered when spoken to, turned pages when instructed, but his mind stayed in the cafeteria, replaying her quiet voice, her careful posture, her fear of being noticed. By the time the final bell rang, he had already made up his mind. He did not ask anyone for permission. Some decisions are made silently, and deeply, long before we realize we've made them. He walked past the waiting line of black sedans and luxury cars outside the school where chauffeurs stood holding doors. His family's driver, Marcus, straightened when he saw him, reaching for the handle of Ethan's usual car. But Ethan shook his head. "Marcus, can you take me somewhere else today?" he asked, trying to sound casual, though something inside him was tight. Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. He had been with Ethan's family for years, had watched the boy grow up, had learned when to speak and when to stay silent. He simply opened the back door. "Where to?" Ethan hesitated, only because saying it out loud made it real. "I need to go to the Ridge Apartments. Building 14. The hesitation in Marcus's expression was small, but Ethan saw it. The Ridge was not a place anyone from Ethan's world visited. It was a part of the city people pretended they didn't know existed. But Marcus nodded and pulled away from the school without another word. The city changed as they drove. Glass buildings gave way to older ones, then to cracked sidewalks and faded brick. The roads grew narrower, the windows smaller, the stores cheaper. Ethan pressed his forehead to the window, watching the city shift from polished to tired. He realized he had never really understood how large the distance was between his life and others, no matter how physically close their worlds might have been. When the car stopped, Ethan stepped out slowly. The building looked worn, the paint peeling around the window frames, a broken railing on the stairs. A group of teenagers sat near the entrance, talking in low voices. They stared at Ethan, not hostile, just curious, surprised to see a boy in a tailored uniform in their neighborhood. Ethan climbed the stairs, his heart beating louder with each step. His hand hovered before knocking, and for a moment, he wondered if he was intruding on something he didn't understand. But then he remembered how Emily's voice broke when she mentioned her mother. He knocked. There was a pause, then the door opened just a few inches. A woman stood behind it, one hand on the handle as though guarding against something. She had pale, tired skin, wisps of blonde hair falling from a once neat bun, and eyes that carried the heaviness of someone who had been strong too long and was now running out of strength. "Yes?" she asked, her voice polite but edged with caution. "Hi. I'm Ethan. I go to school with Emily." He realized he didn't know what to say next. "I just wanted to check on her." The woman blinked, and her expression flickered, surprise, confusion, and something like embarrassment. She opened the door a little wider. Emily was sitting on the floor beside a small coffee table, crayons scattered around a coloring sheet. She looked up, startled, then nervous. "Ethan?" Ethan stepped inside at her mother's gesture. The apartment was small but clean in the way that takes work, not the way that comes easily. The walls were bare except for a single framed picture of Emily as a toddler. The kitchen cupboards were partially open, revealing how few items were inside. On the counter sat a stack of envelopes, all the same shape, with red print visible even from a distance. Medical bills. Debt notices. Late payment warnings. He didn't need to be told. Emily's mother saw his eyes pause on the envelopes and tried to shift her body slightly, as though physically shielding them from view. She cleared her throat. "I'm Claire." Her voice sounded like someone who used to speak with confidence but now spoke cautiously, carefully, aware of how easily words could crack. Ethan nodded. "Emily told me things have been difficult." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, pain flickering across her face, not because he mentioned it, but because Emily had known enough to say it. "I was a nurse," she said. "I loved my job. I was good at it." She didn't say it with pride. She said it like someone remembering a part of themselves they can see but can't reach anymore. "But after the injury, after the surgery, I couldn't go back. And insurance, well, we were not eligible. So." She spread her hands slightly, meaning everything in nothing. Ethan felt the weight of the room settle over him. This wasn't a tragedy born of irresponsibility. It was a tragedy born of a system that breaks people quietly. Emily had gone back to coloring but was listening, the way children do when adults think they aren't. Ethan looked at Claire. "Emily is smart. And kind. And strong." Something in Claire's face trembled. She sat down, because standing suddenly seemed too heavy. "Thank you," she whispered, not just for the words, but for seeing her daughter, really seeing her. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was human. Real. Ethan realized he hadn't come here with a plan. There was no solution in his hands. But something mattered in the simple act of being here, in not turning away. Emily looked up at him, that same fragile caution lingering in her expression. "You came," she said softly, like she wasn't sure she believed it until she heard it out loud. "Of course I did," Ethan said. He didn't know yet what he was going to do. But he knew with certainty that he would do something. And that was the moment everything began to change. Ethan spent the weekend unable to return to his usual routine. Every moment of quiet filled with the image of Emily sitting in that cafeteria, hands folded in her lap as if waiting for permission to exist. He thought of her mother, Claire, sitting on the worn couch, trying to hold herself together in front of her daughter. He thought of the stack of medical bills, of the hollow look in Claire's eyes, and of the way Emily's voice softened when she spoke about her mom, as if even sadness needed to be protected. By Monday morning, the halls of the school felt different to him, even though nothing had physically changed. The walls were still spotless, the lockers still gleaming, the students still laughing in clusters. But now he saw something beneath it all, how easy it was to move through this place without ever noticing who might be struggling. He saw how invisible hunger could be when hidden behind quiet behavior and pressed lips. At lunch, Ethan bought 2 trays again. He didn't hesitate. He didn't try to conceal it. He simply walked to Emily's table and set one down in front of her as though it were the most ordinary gesture in the world. She looked up at him, her expression conflicted, grateful, embarrassed, uncertain. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "But I want to." She didn't argue further. She ate. Carefully. Slowly. As though she needed to ask the food itself for permission. But not everyone ignored this exchange. 2 boys from Ethan's grade, boys who knew exactly who Ethan was and what his family represented, watched from across the room. One of them leaned to whisper something, and the other laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a small, sharp one. The kind that feels like a pin pressed into someone's skin. It wasn't long before the murmurs spread. Not cruel ones, not yet, but curious. Why was Ethan Marshall sitting with the quiet girl who never spoke? Why did she always have an empty tray? Why was he giving her food? It was a small shift, barely audible, but the school had its own social gravity, and the smallest imbalance created ripples. The next day, the cafeteria staff noticed. A lunch supervisor approached them, smiling politely. Too politely. "Sweetheart," she said to Emily, "if you need assistance with lunch, we can arrange something through the office." Emily froze. Her shoulders curled in, her hands immediately clasped. Her voice barely formed. "No. Please. I don't need." Ethan could see panic rising in her, the same fear she had confessed. If the school got involved, someone might decide her mother was unfit. That they should be separated. That help would come at the cost of home. He stepped in quickly. "It's my lunch. I don't like eating alone. We're just sharing. That's all." The supervisor hesitated. She did not fully believe him, but protocol was a strange and rigid thing, and without proof of need, she could not force anything. She nodded and walked away. Emily sat very still. Her breathing was thin and shallow. "I can't let them call anyone," she whispered, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "They won't," Ethan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to reassure her with empty promises. He simply sounded sure. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. The school principal called Ethan to his office. The principal was a tall man with neatly parted hair and a perfectly pressed suit, and he greeted Ethan with the polished tone used for parents, donors, and people who were either very important or had the potential to cause trouble. "Ethan," he began, folding his hands on his desk, "I've been informed that you've been helping another student during lunch." Ethan did not flinch. "Yes." The principal smiled, the kind of smile meant to soften reprimand. "I appreciate your generosity. Truly. But the school has procedures for students in need. It is important that support is handled correctly. Quietly. Through the appropriate channels." Ethan understood what the principal meant. He didn't need it explained. Maintain the image. Don't disrupt the illusion of affluence. Don't make hardship visible. Because visible hardship made people uncomfortable. "What if she doesn't want to go through those channels?" Ethan asked. The principal's smile tightened. "Children don't always understand what is best for them." Something inside Ethan snapped then, not loudly, not explosively, but with a quiet, decisive finality, like a thread pulled too tight. "Maybe adults don't either," he replied. The principal's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his composed face. Ethan held his gaze. He did not drop his eyes. He did not apologize. He walked out of the office without being dismissed. That evening, at home, Ethan sat across from his father at dinner. The table was long, polished, and lined with dishes prepared by a private chef. His father barely looked at him, skimming through business updates on his tablet. Ethan cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, "there's something I need to talk to you about." His father did not look up. "If it's about school, your grades are fine. If it's about sports, you can switch teams. If it's about clubs, join whichever one you like. I trust your judgment." "It's about someone who needs help," Ethan said. His father finally lifted his eyes, and the room felt colder. "Ethan," he said, "don't involve yourself in problems you do not understand." Ethan realized then that his father did not mean Emily. His father meant the world. Ethan sat back, the decision forming fully now, clear enough to speak, solid enough to carry. If his father would not help, then Ethan would have to act without him. And he would. Ethan did not sleep much that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, his room too large and too quiet. Everything in it felt excessive, the enormous bed, the designer lamp, the shelves full of things bought because someone thought he should have them. None of it felt like it belonged to him. It was a life built around him, not with him. And now that he had seen how little some people had, the contrast was unbearable. He kept seeing Emily's hands folded in her lap, and her mother carefully pretending not to be in pain. He knew he could keep giving Emily food, but that would fix only one small corner of a much larger problem. Something had to change in the school itself. But he also understood that the school would do nothing unless someone forced it to look directly at the truth. The next day, instead of heading to lunch, Ethan went to the library. He sat at a table and pulled out his notebook. He did not have a clear plan when he began to write, but the words came quickly. A simple idea at first, a fund for students who could not afford meals. But he hated the word charity. Charity implied pity. Charity implied separation. Charity meant those who have helping those who don't, while staying comfortably above them. He didn't want that. What he wanted was dignity. Something that allowed someone to receive help without feeling exposed, labeled, or watched. He crossed out the word charity and wrote instead, the warm lunch program. A system that would allow students to receive meals without paperwork, without explanations, without being singled out. He wrote that the funding could come from small voluntary contributions, $1 from any student who wanted to help. If even a quarter of the school participated, it would cover everything. He wrote that the cafeteria staff could simply scan cards as usual, with no special codes or separate lines. No one would know who was paying and who wasn't. Everyone would just eat. That was the point. As he looked over what he had written, he realized something else. This wasn't just an idea. It was completely possible. It just required someone to start it. Someone the school could not easily ignore. Someone with influence. He knew exactly who that someone was supposed to be, him. That afternoon, he waited outside the faculty office until one of the younger teachers walked by, a teacher who seemed to actually see students rather than simply manage them. Mrs. Hale. She was carrying a stack of books and looked tired, but when she noticed Ethan, she smiled in a genuine, warm way that most adults never did. "Ethan? Is everything all right? Could I talk to you?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes." She led him into an empty classroom, set her books down, and listened while he explained the program. He expected her to ask logistical questions or tell him it would be difficult. Instead, when he finished, she took a slow breath and looked at him with something like quiet, aching pride. "You're doing something brave," she said. "And necessary. I'll support you however I can." The relief that washed through him was almost overwhelming. Someone believed in this. Someone believed in him. But support from one teacher would not be enough. The principal still held the power to approve or deny anything that affected the school. Ethan needed to reach beyond him. He needed students. So the next day, he stood up in the cafeteria, not on a chair, not shouting, but simply standing, and said, "Can I have everyone's attention for just a second?" The room quieted more out of surprise than interest. Ethan Marshall did not usually make announcements. He spoke plainly. He did not mention Emily by name. He did not describe any individual situation. He simply said that not everyone in the school could afford food, and that no one should have to feel ashamed or singled out because of it. He said that if everyone gave $1 a week, no one would have to be hungry. He explained how the warm lunch program would work. There was silence for a moment. And then, slowly, someone stood up and placed $1 on his tray. Then another. And another. Coins. Crinkled bills. Even someone who usually mocked everything serious tossed a 5 with a shrug. It continued like that for the rest of lunch. And Emily sat very still, watching the bills gather, tears pooling silently though she didn't wipe them away. But the moment was not universally celebrated. When Ethan returned home, his father was waiting in the sitting room, posture stiff, hands clasped behind his back. "I heard what you did today." Ethan did not deny it. "I'm creating something that matters." His father's expression was one of controlled disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than anger. "You are embarrassing this family," he said coldly. "You are making us look like we cannot take care of our own community. You are suggesting that our city, our employees, are failing. This is reckless and naive." Ethan felt his heartbeat in his throat. "I don't care how it looks. People are hungry." His father's voice hardened to stone. "This ends now." Ethan said nothing. He did not argue. He simply understood something with painful clarity. His father believed protecting reputation mattered more than protecting people. So Ethan made another decision. Quietly. Finally. He would continue. With or without his father's approval. No matter the cost. Ethan woke before sunrise the next morning, not because an alarm had gone off, but because his mind refused to let him rest. His father's words, spoken with that cool finality men of power often use to close discussions, still echoed in the air, "This ends now." But Ethan already understood something important. When someone says that, what they truly mean is, "I expect you to stop." And the truth was, Ethan had no intention of stopping. At breakfast, the table was quiet. His father read the financial section, his mother scrolled through her phone, sipping coffee without looking up. The house staff moved quietly, trained to be invisible. Ethan pushed the eggs around his plate, appetite nowhere to be found. Finally, without preface, his father spoke. "I've suspended your allowance for the time being." His voice remained calm, even polite, the way surgeons speak while making the first incision. "If you insist on making choices without consulting this family, then you will learn what independence actually costs." His mother glanced up for the briefest moment, eyes flicking between them, but she said nothing. She didn't interfere in conflict, that was simply the rule of the house. Ethan did not argue. There was no point. Instead, he nodded once and set down his fork. His father interpreted this as resignation. But Ethan knew it was something entirely different, acceptance of the fight. After school, instead of being driven home, Ethan asked Marcus to drop him at the grocery store across town. Marcus hesitated, opening his mouth as if to say something, but then only nodded. He understood more than he ever voiced. Ethan walked to the store manager and asked for an application. The manager, a tired man with kind eyes, looked at Ethan's uniform and expensive shoes with open confusion. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "I am." He was hired to work evenings stocking shelves and sweeping floors. It was physical and repetitive, but Ethan didn't mind. There was something grounding about it, work that did not rely on reputation or influence. Work that was simply work. And more importantly, it gave him money he could direct wherever he chose. When he returned to school the next day, the warm lunch program was already growing. Mrs. Hale had spoken to other teachers, and they had quietly contributed. 2 parents donated anonymously. One of the cafeteria workers volunteered to help keep track of extra trays. The idea had begun to spread not because of speeches, but because hunger was something people understood on a human level. There were challenges, of course. One lunch supervisor quietly told Ethan that the principal had warned staff not to encourage this disruption. But even she slipped a few pieces of fruit onto trays when she thought no one was looking. Compassion is like that, it leaks through cracks, even when doors are shut. Students had begun to talk, too. Not mockingly now, but with curiosity, and something like respect. One girl told Ethan her little brother sometimes went without breakfast. A boy admitted that last year his family almost lost their home and no one knew. These were things people didn't say until someone else made space for honesty. Emily watched all of this from her quiet corner, uncertain, cautious, but with a different light behind her eyes. She still ate slowly, still sat neatly, still seemed to brace for something to go wrong, but she no longer looked invisible. People saw her now, not as an object of pity, but as someone who belonged at the table like anyone else. One afternoon, while Ethan was restocking cereal at the grocery store, he heard someone call his name. He turned and saw Emily standing there with her mother, a small basket of inexpensive items in their hands: bread, oatmeal, a few apples. Emily's face lit up when she saw him, something rare and startling in its softness. "You work here?" she asked, surprised. Ethan nodded, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeve. "Yeah. I needed to help with the program." Emily's mother looked at him then, really looked. Not as a wealthy boy or a benefactor, but as a person choosing to stand in the struggle with them. Her expression wavered, and she looked down for a moment, as if steadiness required effort. "You shouldn't have to do this," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged in a way that did not dismiss her concern, but accepted it. "Maybe not. But I want to." Emily smiled, not a big smile, not a loud one, but the kind that forms slowly, gently, as if emerging from somewhere long buried. And in that small grocery aisle, under humming fluorescent lights and surrounded by shelves of cereal boxes, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition. A link. A shared truth. You are not alone anymore. That night, when Ethan returned home, his father stopped him in the hallway. He glanced at Ethan's clothes, noticing the faint marks of labor, the dust, the creases, the tiredness. "You're really going to keep this up?" his father said. Not a question. "Yes," Ethan answered, just as simply. His father held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something: weakness, doubt, hesitation. But he found none. And though no one said it aloud, both of them understood a new reality had formed. The boy his father thought he controlled was no longer someone who could be controlled. He had chosen a side. And it was not his father's. Ethan did not expect the backlash to come so quickly, nor did he expect it to come from places he had once trusted. By the end of the week, the principal had scheduled a special meeting with the school board to discuss the warm lunch program. The official statement posted on the school website described it as a review of resource management, but everyone who read it understood the real meaning: someone was trying to shut him down. The board members were people Ethan had known since childhood, friends of his father, polished donors, individuals who attended charity galas with smiling photographs and empty toasts to community improvement. They sat around a long conference table in the administration building, their suits crisp, their expressions neutral in the way that only people who believe they are in control can manage. The principal began by thanking Ethan for his noble empathy and good intentions. Those words, spoken with the kind of gentle reverence adults use when they are preparing to dismiss a child, made something cold form in Ethan's chest. He sat upright, his posture calm, his hands folded neatly, but every muscle in his body was sharp, focused. The principal cleared his throat. "However, we must consider the broader impact of encouraging unregulated aid programs in the school. We cannot risk mismanagement of funds, nor can we set a precedent that bypasses school administration." A board member leaned forward, hands steepled. "This school prides itself on maintaining dignity. Publicizing hardship creates a negative environment and draws unnecessary attention to private family matters." Ethan listened. He had rehearsed arguments in his head the night before, but now the words that rose in him were not rehearsed. They were honest. "I didn't publicize anything," he said, his voice steady. "I created a way for students to eat without being singled out or embarrassed. I'm not exposing suffering. I'm trying to keep people from having to suffer alone." There was a pause. A controlled, measured pause, the kind adults use to signal that they believe the conversation is over. The principal exhaled slowly. "Ethan, this program ends today. The school will handle assistance through our established channels." He said it like the decision was final. But Ethan felt no fear. Only clarity. "With respect," he said, "your channels don't work. If they did, I wouldn't have needed to start this." A murmur rippled across the board members. They were not accustomed to being challenged, certainly not by a student, and certainly not one of their own elite. The principal's expression tightened. "Are you suggesting the administration is failing?" For some students, Ethan replied, "Yes." It was not anger. It was simply truth. A truth spoken out loud, and truth, when spoken plainly, is far more dangerous than shouting. The meeting dissolved into procedural language and closing statements. Ethan walked out before they finished, leaving them talking behind him. He had heard enough. Outside, the hallway was empty except for one person, Emily, sitting on a bench with her backpack in her lap. She looked up when he stepped out. Her expression held no dramatic fear, only quiet understanding. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "They want to stop you." "They might," he said. Emily studied him for a long moment. "Will you stop?" Ethan knelt so his eyes were level with hers. It didn't feel like speaking to a child. It felt like speaking to someone who had already lived through more than most adults. "No," he said. "I won't." Emily exhaled softly, not relief exactly, but release, like she had been holding her breath for a long time. The next day, something unexpected happened. Not planned. Not forced. Something human. Students began showing up to school carrying extra food. Granola bars. Sandwiches. Apples. Juice boxes. They placed them quietly into a decorated box in the cafeteria that someone had labeled warm lunch with marker and stickers. They did not announce it. They did not ask permission. They simply acted. One boy who never spoke to anyone placed 3 apples inside and walked away before anyone could thank him. A girl from the cheer team folded 2 homemade sandwiches into napkins and left them carefully, as though setting down something precious. Even students who had little themselves shared what they could. It wasn't charity. It was solidarity. No one looked at Emily differently that day. No one whispered. No one stared. She ate like every other student. Meanwhile, Ethan's father received 3 calls from the school and 2 from other board members. At dinner, he set down his fork with the slow, deliberate weight of a man ready to reassert control. "You have made this bigger than it needed to be," he said. Ethan looked at him, not with rebellion, not with defiance, but with certainty. "It was always this big," he replied. "I'm just not pretending it isn't anymore." His father opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in Ethan's eyes made him pause. It was not hatred. Not resentment. It was conviction, the kind that does not break. And for the first time, Ethan's father could not tell his son what to do. He could only watch him become someone he no longer knew how to control. The change, when it finally came, did not arrive like an announcement. There was no moment where the world suddenly shifted in a burst of applause or recognition. Instead, it came quietly, in the way seasons change, gradually, steadily, so that one day people simply realized that something was different and could no longer remember when it had started. The warm lunch program did not disappear after the board meeting, despite the principal's attempts to contain it. If anything, the attempt to stop it made students more determined to support it. The box in the cafeteria filled faster each day. Parents who learned of the situation through whispered conversations began discreetly sending extra food with their children. A small local bakery donated day-old bread, still soft and warm. A teacher's niece who worked at a community garden dropped off crates of vegetables once a week. No speeches. No charity banners. Just a quiet, shared promise that no one at school would go hungry. Ethan continued working at the grocery store in the evenings. Some nights he was exhausted, his hands aching from repeated lifting, his shoulders sore, but he never once considered stopping. The work grounded him. It reminded him why he had begun. At school, he was still the son of a billionaire. At the store, he was simply someone stocking shelves. And in that simplicity, there was something healing. Emily changed too, though slowly. She no longer sat in the corner of the cafeteria. She joined Ethan and a few other students at their table, cautiously at first, then with a quiet comfort. She began to talk more, in soft sentences that carried careful thought. She laughed sometimes, short and sudden, like she was surprised her body still remembered how. There were days she still looked tired, still folded into herself when adults spoke too sharply, still paused when someone asked questions she didn't know how to answer. But she no longer looked invisible. She looked present. At home, the tension between Ethan and his father settled into something quieter, heavier, like two forces pushing in opposite directions but refusing to break away entirely. His father watched him now, not with anger, but with a kind of troubled curiosity, as if trying to understand who his son had become. One evening, Ethan came home late, his clothes rumpled from work, and found his father sitting alone in the dimly lit living room. The television was off. The house was silent. His father looked at him with none of the usual control in his expression. "I saw the newspaper today," he said. "They wrote about the food program." Ethan nodded. He did not know if this conversation would be a fight or something else. "They said it's spreading. Other schools are asking how to start their own." There was a long pause. Ethan waited. His father exhaled slowly and set his glass down with care, as though afraid of breaking something that could not be replaced. "I don't understand you," he said, but the words did not sound like judgment. They sounded like truth stripped of all pretense. "You will," Ethan replied, not as a challenge, but as a promise. His father looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded once and stood, placing a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder before leaving the room. It was not reconciliation. But it was a beginning. Weeks passed. The warm lunch program became part of the school routine, unremarkable in the way good things eventually become normal. A new kindness settled among the students, not loud or dramatic, but steady and familiar. Hunger no longer hid in corners. Shame no longer sat at lunch tables. And then one day, near the end of spring, Emily came running up to Ethan in the hallway, her hair a little messy from wind, her eyes bright in a way he had never seen before. She held a small slip of paper in her hand. "My mom got a job," she said, breathless. "A real job. A good one. With hours she can handle. And benefits. And," she said, "we're going to be okay." The paper was a simple hiring notice, but Emily held it like something sacred. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not sadness, not relief exactly, but something deeper, something like witnessing a door open that had once seemed forever locked. He smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but with warmth that reached his eyes. "You deserve this," he said. Emily nodded, her voice trembling in the gentlest way. "We all do." They walked outside together. The sky was pale blue, sunlight stretching across the pavement. Students laughed nearby, unaware that anything extraordinary had happened. But something had. Something quiet. Something real. Their world had not changed overnight. It had changed because someone refused to look away. Because someone believed that small, consistent kindness could become something stronger. Kindness had not made Ethan weaker. It had made him brave. It had made him whole. And it had given Emily something even rarer than food. It had given her tomorrow.